What if a people's greatest strength was also their fatal weakness? At the desolate southern end of the world, where the land shatters into a frigid labyrinth of islands and glacial water, lies Chilean Patagonia. It is a place of brutal, overwhelming beauty, a landscape that seems actively hostile to human life. For centuries, this unforgiving environment was the exclusive domain of a people who learned to live not just in it, but as a part of it. They were the Yagan, the canoe people of Tierra del Fuego, a culture that existed in profound, near-absolute isolation from the rest of humanity. This isolation, their greatest survival tool, became a crucible, a relentless natural experiment on their very DNA over the course of approximately 8 generations. What happens to a people when their world shrinks to just a few dozen families, separated by treacherous seas and impassable glaciers? What secrets does the bloodline begin to tell when the only available partners are those who share a recent common ancestor? The question that echoes from the icy cliffs of Patagonia is not one of myth or legend, but of a raw biological reality, whispered in the unsettling accounts of the first outsiders who witnessed them. Those first encounters, marked by disbelief and incomprehension, would unwittingly document the beginning of the end. Pinpointing the exact physical manifestations of this genetic isolation is a difficult task. Clouded by the passage of time and the scarcity of objective medical records from the era, the accounts of early explorers and missionaries are often unreliable, stained by prejudice and a lack of scientific understanding. Yet within these biased journals and in later, more rigorous anthropological studies, some consistent and troubling patterns emerge. There are mentions of certain family groups exhibiting a higher than normal incidence of specific physical anomalies. Some reports describe individuals with congenital vision problems. Others hint at skeletal malformations or a particular susceptibility to certain respiratory illnesses, even before the catastrophic epidemics brought by Europeans. While it's tempting to label these as mutations, a more accurate description would be the predictable result of genetic homozygosity. Additionally, the Fuegians were renowned for their incredible adaptation to cold, including a significantly higher basal metabolic rate than other human populations. While this was long considered a purely physiological adaptation, some modern geneticists theorize that this unique metabolism may have been a trait rapidly selected for and amplified within their small gene pools. It is impossible to definitively separate the effects of genetics from the effects of a brutally harsh lifestyle and malnutrition, yet the persistent whispers in the historical record of family lines with distinct, shared physical frailties suggest that the consequences of generations of isolation were not just theoretical. They were being etched into the very bodies of the people who endured it. To unravel this enigma, we must look not just at the bodies, but at the world that shaped them. To understand the secret locked in the Fuegian bloodline, one must first understand their world. Tierra del Fuego is not a single landmass, but an archipelago, a chaotic cluster of thousands of islands, fjords, and peninsulas carved by ancient glaciers. For the Yagan and their neighbors, the Kaveskar, the world was water. The land was merely a temporary place to camp, to find shelter, to bury the dead. Their home was the canoe. This nomadic, aquatic existence meant that while they were masters of their maritime environment, they were also its prisoners. A fierce storm or an impassable strait could cut off a single family group for months, years, or even a generation. This was not a unified nation, but a collection of small, semi-nomadic kinship groups, often numbering no more than 20 or 30 individuals. For centuries, this was simply their way of life. But genetically, something profound was happening. Each of these small, separated groups became its own distinct gene pool, setting the stage for a dramatic and irreversible alteration of their very biology. A genetic bottleneck acts like a filter, and to make it clearer, let's use an analogy. Imagine the gene pool of a large population as thousands of decks of cards, full of diversity. Now, imagine a small clan of 30 people becomes isolated on a remote shore. Suddenly, they no longer have access to thousands of decks. They are stuck with a single deck. Each generation is a new hand of cards being dealt, but always from the same limited deck. In this group, certain rare genetic traits, or alleles, might be present in one or two of the original founders. Think of them as a rare card, like a single unique ace of spades. In a large population with thousands of decks, the chance of two people being dealt that rare card in the same hand is extremely low. But in this small group with only one deck, the mathematical probability of two people carrying the same rare, recessive gene meeting and having children increases dramatically with each successive generation. After 4, 5, or 6 generations of forced endogamy, the technical term for marrying, within a specific group, these once rare genes can become common. Recessive traits, which need a copy of the gene from both the mother and the father to manifest, suddenly had a much higher chance of appearing. The question then becomes, what was emerging from the blood of the Fuegians after centuries of being dealt hands from the same genetic deck? One of the most direct, if chilling, theories to explain the Fuegians' unique biological state is that of pure genetic determinism. This perspective argues that the people were, in essence, passengers in a biological process over which they had no control. The unforgiving geography of Tierra del Fuego was the sole architect of their fate. It created the isolation, which in turn created the genetic bottleneck. The bottleneck inevitably led to a high degree of consanguinity, and this inbreeding brought dormant recessive genes to the surface. The genetic hand was dealt by geography, and they had no choice but to play it. This theory is compelling in its simplicity and alignment with established scientific principles, yet, to many anthropologists, it feels incomplete. It strips the Yagan people of their agency, reducing their rich, complex society to a mere outcome of DNA. Can we really believe their culture had no say in the matter? A purely genetic explanation ignores a crucial element: human culture. The Yagan were not passive subjects in a natural experiment. They were intelligent, adaptable people with complex social systems. A competing theory suggests that their cultural practices played a direct and powerful role in shaping their genetic destiny, as if they were actively trying to shuffle the deck. Anthropological studies have revealed that, far from being indiscriminate, Fuegian societies had incredibly complex and strict kinship rules that dictated who could marry whom. These rules were specifically designed to prevent procreation between close relatives, a cultural attempt to fight back against the pressures of geographic isolation. The constant movement in canoes could have been a deliberate strategy to seek out distant, less related partners. A conscious effort to introduce new cards into the bloodline and avoid being dealt the same dangerous combinations. However, it is possible that under extreme stress, such as a period of famine that wiped out a neighboring group, these taboos may have been forced to break. In a desperate bid for survival, a clan may have been forced to look inward, accelerating the process of inbreeding. Here we must be honest and confront the silence at the heart of this story. We are dealing with fragments, echoes, and educated guesses. The 8 generations is a compelling narrative frame, but it is an estimate, a symbolic representation of a long period of deep isolation. We do not have comprehensive pre-contact DNA samples that would allow us to definitively map their genetic journey. The vast majority of what we know of their culture comes from the records of missionaries and anthropologists who arrived late in their story, recording a society that was already under immense pressure. The last fluent speakers of the Yagan language have now passed away, taking an entire universe of knowledge with them. The silence, therefore, is not just a feature of their past isolation, but a feature of our present investigation. We cannot know the fears of a mother seeing a familiar ailment appear in her child, nor the debates of elders around a fire. The ultimate truth of their experience is lost to us, buried under the ice and the sea. The end, when it came, was not a slow decline. It was an avalanche. For centuries, the Fuegians' isolation had been both a shield and a crucible, their greatest strength. It protected them from the diseases of the wider world, but it also left their immune systems utterly naive. When sustained contact with European seal hunters, missionaries, and settlers began in the mid-19th century, the consequences were apocalyptic. Diseases that were common ailments in Europe, measles, smallpox, tuberculosis, ripped through the Yagan population with breathtaking speed. Their population, estimated at around 3,000 at the time of Darwin's visit, plummeted to a few hundred by the turn of the 20th century. It is a profoundly tragic irony that the genetic crucible which may have heightened their vulnerability to certain hereditary conditions also left them utterly defenseless against outside pathogens. The very isolation that shaped their unique bloodline, their strength, became their fatal weakness, making their destruction all but inevitable upon contact. The systematic efforts of missionaries to settle the nomadic people shattered their way of life, dismantling their entire world. The story ceases to be a mystery about genetics and becomes a stark, brutal lesson in the devastating impact of colonization. Today, the silence of Patagonia is of a different kind. It is the silence of absence. Christina Calderon, the last full-blooded Yagan and the last native speaker of her language, passed away in 2022. With her, an unbroken link to a past thousands of years old was severed forever. Yet, the story doesn't entirely end. There are descendants, people of mixed heritage, who proudly identify with their Yagan ancestry, fighting to preserve what remains of their culture. The tale of the Fuegian people serves as a profound and somber reflection for the modern world. It is a warning about the fragility of human diversity, both cultural and genetic. The mystery that began with a question about a mutant bloodline concludes not with a simple, frightening answer, but with a complex and heartbreaking truth. The real tragedy was not in their genes. It was in the indifference and destructiveness of the outside world that broke their isolation. Their legacy compels us to look at the last isolated cultures of our planet with a renewed sense of respect and a fierce urgency to protect them, before their silence too becomes permanent. What are your reflections on this tragic intersection of genetics, isolation, and history? Let us know in the comments below, and if you found this investigation compelling, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the world's forgotten stories.